All right, you guys. Let's see. I didn't get to upload anything yesterday because nothing would upload from my house because I don't have Wi-Fi. So if you've ever given me an excuse like that, now I'm like pulling the card to return the favor. Okay. Unit 5 review. Industrial Revolution. We're doing a little bit of like crossover from last time, so that's why that's there. So don't complain. It began in Britain. We know that. Why did it begin in Britain? It began there because there was coal near the surface there, so it was more easily accessible. And they had India as one of their colonies. That they were an imperialist force over, and India's gigantic and had a massive population to be able to provide places like Leeds or Manchester with materials that they needed, like cotton, where Leeds or Manchester would weave that cotton into fabric and then sell it back to India or sell it to wherever. Let's see, industrialization, the process of mass producing goods from one location and then distributing them, right? So before this, most of the things that you had were from where you lived. So, like your clothes, your tools, your food, everything was from the town that you lived in or like that surrounding area. But with industrialization, all of the fabric would come from one town. All of the bricks would come from one town. So they would specialize, kind of like the way that we see people specializing from the beginning of the year, going from everybody gathering food every day and hunting to farming, which allowed space for people to specialize and create more farming tools or have other skills like working in medicine or something like that. A factory, I would consider that to be a symbol of industrialization, right? In cities, we see factories pop up, and that is the space in which people work and for a long time live in order to, oh, that's so sad, in which people work and in some cases live, to be able to mass produce this stuff. So specialization could be good because we come up with some really cool stuff. I think I fixed it. But it can also be bad because if we specialize too far, just like if you have too much ice cream or too much chocolate or too much, I don't know, carrots and your body turns orange. Is this just, oh, got it. This is horrible. I really should not be this off task. Sorry guys. Specialization can go too far and people can end up in the situation where they're working 16 hours a day doing the same task over and over again. That's not the kind of specialization that improves society, I think. Unless you're paid really well and you can specialize in your spare time in something else. Urbanization, people moving to the cities for these industrial jobs specifically, which is why Detroit became what it is. But we want to think of it more in context to like what was happening in Europe, and now we can look at other places around the world, right? We know enough, we see enough about the U.S. Think about the way industrialization and urbanization happens in other places around the world and what it looks like there, because we've gotten a lot further than a lot of other places. Okay, middle class is new money people. People rising out of the poor working class through business ownership. I skipped entrepreneurs. Those are those business owners, people who are beginning to start and own businesses in order to class climb, to like move themselves up, which works sometimes, but doesn't work as well other times, right? You can take more risks when you're old money and you just have all that stuff laying around gaining interest. Also, I think people that are old money are more ruthless. People that are new money are still trying to be decent, and then they fail. But if they become ruthless like the old people, maybe they succeed. Imperialism, power, control over another land or country, right? So Europe took over the majority of the world, and they justified doing that with this concept of social Darwinism. So social Darwinism also justified racism. So racism is assuming that you have racial superiority, because of your culture or ways of life that are associated with your race. If you assume that those are better, that makes imperialism a lot easier. Social Darwinism. So the original Darwinism is the concept of like some animals survive and some animals do not, and the ones that survive will then have offspring that have the right traits to survive. So it like traits mutate within different species for them to survive. Social Darwinism is applying that concept to humans, saying that like because Europeans were more disease resistant and because they had these modern warfare things, these guns, all this stuff, guns, and because they were using steel the way that they were racially superior, right? They had figured those things out, so they decided, okay, cool, that means we're racially superior, and we should teach everyone else to be just like us. They should wear clothes like us, they should speak like us, they should go to school like us, they should believe in our religions. That is what social Darwinism justified for Europeans at the time, like a Eurocentrism, and that made imperialism okay in the minds of a lot of people. Sepoy is a British-trained Indian soldier for the British Crown. That is how the British controlled India for so long, so successfully, which is crazy because they were all Indians, so they could have gotten their training and then turned on the British, but they did not. I think it's because, sadly, a lot of these countries bought into the concept of social Darwinism. We're like, you're right, you do know the right way. You do this, you are right, you are better, we want to be like you. So the concept of like surpassing or taking them over seemed impossible. Okay. Berlin Conference. The Divide of Africa in 1884 happened in Berlin. A bunch of European people got together, leaders got together, and they had a 5-meter long map of Africa, and they literally drew lines on it. And per the people that were there, they were drinking a lot while they were drawing those lines. Like, you could slip, and happen to make a country a different shape. There's jokes about that, which is kind of sad and scary. But they divided Africa in order to ensure that, like, the British didn't get it all, or the Germans didn't get it all, that everybody got their little piece, and they could all benefit from all of the resources in Africa that the Africans should have been benefiting from. And I'm not going in order. You guys are going to be really irritated. Colonization, control or power over indigenous peoples. So imperialism is about the land and its resources. Colonization is about the people and, like, per the cash crops, were created resources as well. But colonization was justified by, like, we're going to convert these people to our religion because Christianity is the right religion, whereas that wasn't always the concept in imperialism. Cash crop. Crops grown for commercial value, not personal use, right? So if a whole country switches from growing food for them to eat to cash crops, sometimes they have a famine because they have no food left to eat and no one's willing to give them the food that they need if there's a famine because everybody is short. So that's a big downfall to growing cash crops. But cash crops would be things like cotton, tobacco, coffee, bananas, things that you're going to sell abroad that you like can't sustain yourself consistently off of. Trade embargo is an economic sanction, right? So if you don't like the way that China is acting, you put a trade embargo on them after you get their whole population hooked on opium, and their population will freak out because they're addicted to opium, and now there's a trade embargo and they can't access the opium at all. So that's a trade embargo. It can be really useful. We have a lot of issues with those between China and the U.S. right now. If you look in the news. King Leopold of Belgium, he started a private company to be able to take over the Congo so that he didn't have to follow any international law surrounding the way people were treated in the Congo. The Congo is a very lush area in Africa that is sub-Saharan, meaning below the desert in the jungle. King Leopold took it over because he wanted the rubber from the rubber trees. And he killed an excessive amount of people in order to get that rubber, but I don't think he was considering those people to be actual people because of the way social Darwinism was being implied, which is sad. So he took over. One of the main punishments if you didn't reach your quota was to get your hand chopped off, which makes it really hard to reach your quota the next day. A lot of people are missing 1 or 2 hands consistently. The the numbers for it look like about twice the amount of people died in half the amount of time as the Holocaust, which is a lot. It's crazy that we look at the Holocaust like it's the worst genocide that happened, which it is, and it's like unspeakable and horrible, but that happened all over the place. Why aren't we looking at other genocides that occurred? Why aren't we looking at like the issues that the British created in India between Muslims and Hindus, and then just like left and let the Muslims and Hindus battle it out? Why aren't we looking at the Congo? Why didn't we take Rwanda more seriously? That was super recent. There's some really rough ones that we just haven't spent the time looking at. Also, like if we're going to say genocide, we can talk about the way the U.S. treated the indigenous people. Like we should be looking at that the same way that we look at the way Germans treated Jewish people and disabled people and gay people and gypsies. It's a crazy, crazy stuff. All right, fall of the Ottoman Empire. I wrote on here that I want to reference the movie. So we watched the movie Queen of the Desert. It's pretty long, but it took us through Amman, Petra, Cairo, Damascus, the Golan Heights, Hayel, a bunch of different areas throughout the Middle East that were part of the Ottoman Empire while the Ottoman Empire was kind of falling apart. So I would say 1905 to 1918, because the Ottoman Empire chose the wrong side of World War One. They really fell apart, but before that, the British were already taking jabs at them, trying to like print fake money and throw it into their system to cause inflation. What else did they do? They like knew about the miscommunications that were happening with the empire being so large and exploited that. They stole from the empire. They funded rebellious uprisings against the empire. So if somebody wanted to come up and take over Egypt, they thought they could run Egypt better, the British would supply them with money and weapons in order to fight off the Ottoman Empire so they could make Egypt independent, things like that. They just really wanted the Ottoman Empire to fall apart because it was something that was threatening the future of, not the future, it was threatening the grandness, the amazingness. It was just a roadblock to the British controlling the whole world. Amman, Jordan was one of the headquarters for the Ottoman Empire and for the British at the time of that movie in 1914. Petra, Jordan is a ancient site that is still super duper cool and one of the wonders of the world, so you should for sure go there. Cairo, Egypt is the capital of Egypt, and it's not that far from the Giza pyramids, which is also a wonder of the world. And then Damascus, Syria was the center of the Arab world for a really, really long time until the Ottoman Empire moved its seat to Istanbul. And that city is now completely destroyed because of the Syrian civil war. Civil war meaning like there was like 7 different groups fighting each other in it. Okay, Bedouins, nomadic people in the Middle East. So when we saw that movie, make sure I said everything I wanted to about the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Yeah, I mean, you can tell most of it as long as you watch the movie. The Bedouins were nomadic people in the Middle East, so large issues people had were like, who owns this land, when in reality it's like multiple Bedouin tribes that circle through it throughout the year. So no one is consistently, like they can't say my house is there and it's always there because they travel, but that land has always been theirs to live in for those parts of the year. So that made it really hard. It was really hard for European powers to know what was going on and who owned what and like who should control what. Bedouins are hard to understand. Also, Bedouins in East Africa had a lot of issues because people would be traveling around and other people would settle in that area eventually, and then the Bedouins would come back and be like, why are you here? This is ours. And they'd be like, well, you weren't here 2 months ago when we built our houses. And then there's like large confrontations surrounding land ownership. And that's actually most of the conflict between Arabs and Africans in East Africa. It's about that specifically. I think most confrontations around the world are about land, control of land. Either way. Inflation is money losing its value. For example, right now I'll pay like $1 to $1.29 for a carton of eggs. If inflation occurred and it was really intense in the U.S., maybe I'd be paying $8 for a carton of eggs. Everything should be compared against common goods that are bought everywhere. So like eggs, milk, bread, that's how you can understand how inflation is functioning. So when you go to another country and you want to know whether things are more expensive, don't look at the value of the money in comparison to us. Look at like how much you're paying for milk or eggs. So if I pay like 5,000 Costa Rican currency for eggs, but 5,000 Costa Rican currency is $3 in US currency, then that's not that different, right? But it looks really different, but it's not that different. Money is kind of hard to understand on an international scale, but inflation is when money loses its value. So when they make political cartoons about it, they'll show people with like wheelbarrows full of money going to buy their groceries because that money has lost its value. If you look at what's happening in Venezuela, people can make more money off of the paper that the money is printed on than they can per that money itself, which is crazy. All right. Militarism is having a consistent standing army. That was not really a thing until the late 1800s when people began to form consistent standing armies. That can look really threatening, so it makes sense that World War I eventually happened. If all these countries are beefing up their standing armies and sending them to the borders of other countries, you're just warmongering. You're trying to start something. So that was the beginning of militarism. Now we see that the U.S. has the largest standing army, threefold anybody else's in the world. So we should be considered aggressors consistently just because we have the existence of a standing army that large consistently. Yep. Triple Alliance was Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy in second hour. Sorry, you guys. I confused the alliance and the Entente because the alliance for World War II has Great Britain and does not have Germany. So I just get confused because I like World War II better. So the Triple Alliance is Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. And the alliance lasted until 1915. Triple Entente is France, Russia, and Great Britain. And that lasted through the end of the war, and the U.S. added on to it. But I think the U.S. specifically allied with Great Britain to continue after the sinking of the Lithuania. We'll get into that in a minute. Kaiser Wilhelm was a warmonger. That's what I would call him. He beefed up the standing army even more and kind of whispered in a lot of other leaders' ears that they needed to stomp out rebellion or have harsh responses, which might have led to the intensity of World War I. He was in charge from 1888 to 1918 when the war ended. The Western Front is the German-French border, and the Eastern Front is the German-Russian border. So Germany was fighting on both sides, and they used tactics to be able to continuously fight on both sides, but that's part of the reason they lost is because it was both sides. Whereas France was dedicating its whole army to that, Germany could only dedicate half. Trench warfare, we talked about this, digging trenches into the ground and fighting from them. It also meant that people didn't gain or lose ground very quickly, and most of World War I was fought over a couple hundred yards in a long line along Germany and France, and then Germany and Russia. So it was really dirty and grimy, and a lot of people died of disease because trenches, it's like living in a basement that's made of mud with a bunch of water and poop and rats in it. It's gross. Okay, unrestricted submarine warfare. That is why the U.S. got into this whole situation, is because subs were attacking merchant ships or ships with plain old civilians on it. And there was a ship that was sunk in 1917, and it had a bunch of, I think, 24 U.S. citizens on it and a bunch of British citizens, and they were all just like normal people. I was like, that was not how this is supposed to work. Later in 1930, the British put up this concept of we can't attack merchant ships. If you attack merchant ships from now on, you're declaring a state of war, and we're just gonna kill all your submarines, or we'll defeat you in war and take away all your submarines, which happened to Germany anyways. Rationing, dividing up food or materials during a time of war. Usually this happens where you get a certain amount of bread, eggs, and milk per week. To make sure that there's enough to feed everyone, including the soldiers. Propaganda is biased or misleading information presented to the public in order to sway them in a direction to support an effort or a person. The 14 points. I wanted to read these. God, my laptop is going to die. 14 points were created by Woodrow Wilson. Ooh. It was a speech that he put out stating like what the route was to peace post World War I, which he didn't play that big of a role in. People didn't really like his points. One was well, he said a lot of things like no private international understanding of any kind, but diplomacy shall proceed always frankly and in the public view. So all deals have to be made in front of the public. Absolute freedom of navigation upon the seas outside territorial waters must be for everyone. The removal, so far as possible, of all economic barriers and the establishment of equal trade and conditions. So pretty much he was trying to say we can't punish Germany and take everything away from them because we're going to create another issue. But they ignored him and they punished Germany anyways. Because the French and the British had been in this for so long, they were like, they need to repay us for all of the destruction and all of the lives lost because they're the reason this happened. But that just put like a debt that could not be upheld on the German people, and that created people leaning into fascism and then Hitler rising, right? So you can't just punish someone beyond all, like, in a way that they can't return from that punishment or repay what they owe, because they were also, like, Germany was also destroyed from the war and they had lost. Treaty of Versailles ignored the 14 points for the pretty much and decided that everything would be settled on Germany in a way that we now look back and say is super unfair and created issues that led to World War II, but you don't know that at the time, right? It's only with hindsight. The League of Nations was a weak international group that was created. Now we have the United Nations, which is much stronger, kind of, depending on the way you look at it. But the League of Nations did not hold up. But the goal was for all of the nations to be able to get together and consistently work out issues rather than go to war. The Germans weren't allowed in the League of Nations, though, so they didn't even get to participate in that. So it didn't really work that well. So don't ever punish someone beyond means of them repaying it. If you plan on doing that, just tell them that you can't forgive them and you're out. Don't hold stuff over their head forever, because then they'll turn into Germany and they'll, turn to someone like Hitler to solve their problems. That's not what we're trying to do. It's only 22 minutes, you guys, and my laptop is about to die. So I'll see you later, like tomorrow. I heard tomorrow is odds, meaning Thursday is odds, and Friday is evens. Hopefully this was helpful for you. Why aren't you turning off?